Good.
All right. So, welcome everyone. I am Jenna Bella, the Deputy Director of Digital Products here at EPI, and not your main event tonight. I just wanted to stop and thank you for joining us for tonight's discussion of Who's Got the Power, the Resurgence of American Unions by labor historian, longtime union organizer, and EPI senior state policy strategist, Dave Kamper. Yay, the crowd goes wild. Um, we want to thank you so much for taking a pause from the world to join in community and solidarity. It is moments like this that can refuel and help us gather our strength to continue the fight for workers, for justice, and really for America in this moment that we're in right now. A few details before we get started. If you have any questions, please drop them in the Q&A. We will be using those and monitoring those and have time set aside at the end to hopefully address them. We are recording this and we will share it afterwards along with a survey for your feedback because we are looking to learn and get better. Um, and any links that get discussed or mentioned in the course of the conversation, we will make sure to include those as well in the recap. Um, if you'd like, go ahead, introduce yourself in the chat. We would love to hear from, especially all of our union brothers and sisters out there. Tell us where you're from, maybe where you're finding strength in these wild times, because your sharing your light, or how does it go with your candle? Lighting another's candle doesn't dim the light of your own. We all need a little something to pick us up. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Naomi Walker, Executive Vice President here at Economic Policy Institute, to take it away.
Thanks so much, Jen. And I am so glad to be here tonight. So happy to see so many people with us this evening for this exciting conversation about Dave Camper's new book, Who's Got the Power? Um, I want to introduce Dave. We call him Camper,
Yeah,
so I'm
let's
just
just
going to
call me
do that.
Camper.
Is that all right to do
Yeah, yeah.
in front of guests? Okay. So I am going to introduce Camper. Then he'll give us a few opening comments, and then I will ask him some questions before opening up to all of you for questions. So. Um, I'm going to start off. My colleague Dave Kamper is a senior state policy strategist for the State Policy and Research Team at EPI. He believes that worker power and racial equity are necessary components to a healthy democracy. And his work with EPI focuses on organizing to build family economic security and supporting collaboration between policy thinkers and grassroots leaders to win needed policy changes at the state and local level. Before he joined us at EPI in 2021, Camper worked for 20 years in the labor movement in Pennsylvania, Illinois, and Minnesota. He also teaches labor history at the Union Leadership Program at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. So, Camper, I want to turn it over to you to give us some opening remarks.
Thank you so much, Naomi. If you all forgive me, I'm just gonna read the first couple of paragraphs from the book to kind of set the tone. In the small gaps of time between customers, Starbucks baristas talk quietly to each other about the disrespect their company shows them. As they peel off their hazmat suits after cleaning the production line in Topeka, the people who make our Cheetos resolve to stick together and walk out. Victims of sexual violence on campus, faced with a university that values the reputation of its star faculty more than the health and safety of everyone else, find a space to share their anger and find allies. Workaday Hollywood actors, one whose names we don't know, borrow money from each other to pay the rent as millions of us watch them on Netflix and decide to do something about it. Middle-aged automakers, living out of a long stay hotel as they are shuffled from one closing plant to another, bring in militant new leaders for their union and launch the most important strike in the 21st century. This is a book about solidarity at the end of the day, across the country in all kinds of places. It's the same kind of solidarity I had the great privilege to witness on the streets of Minneapolis with 50,000 friends on Friday. Solidarity as power, solidarity as a whole greater than the sum of its parts. I was so inspired by the solidarity that I saw in the labor movement in recent years that I decided to write a book about it. This book is kind of three different things. It's part history, it's part storytelling, and it's part explainer. Too often, those of us who are deep in the labor movement write for each other, and forget that many other people in the world don't know all the jargon we do. And so I tried to write a book that was accessible, especially given the huge rise of union curious people out there, people who kind of think unions seem like a good idea, but don't know much more than that. And the inspiration for this book, if I want to be honest, is something that I think I'm almost uniquely good at, and that's being wrong. My colleagues here at EPI will remember that when the Amazon workers in Staten Island had their union election, the beginning of that week, we had a team meeting to discuss the week ahead, and people said, "Hey, this Amazon election, should we care about it?" And I, as seasoned labor guy, opined said, "Nope, they're going to get killed. There's no reason to pay any attention to it." And that kicked off a whole period, years of me being wrong again and again and again. And it started to make me realize that my long held deep cynicism about the movement, my curmudgeonliness, my belief that however much I believed in what labor was doing, it wasn't going to change, that maybe all that was wrong. And that actually there was something really interesting happening. And I decided to write a book about it. And so that's the journey I took in this book about why I was wrong so much. And I'm thrilled that you're all here to be part of this conversation.
Great. Thank you so much, Camper. And I will say, everyone should read the book. It is so well written and so engaging and entertaining. It is like sort of hearing from your favorite professor or favorite uncle, as one of our staff members said, about what's happening in the labor movement. And I will say, I worked in the labor movement for 20 years, and there were still tidbits of information in this book that were really surprising to me. And so I see in the chat that we have a ton of labor friends with us. Thank you again for joining us. And I think you will find something new and surprising in the book too. So I want to dig in into our questions, and I will start with something I was surprised by. I was surprised that the book was so optimistic and hopeful. And so is that what you set out to write, or were you actually surprised with how it came out?
I think I'll give Grandpa Simpson's answer. It's a little from column A, a little from column B. I knew that something was happening. But as I wrote the book, I saw the connections, and I realized I'm not just seeing individual moments. I'm seeing a movement building in a way that was greatly refreshing. And then, like, there was a brief period of time about a year ago where I thought, oh, geez, I just wrote a really optimistic seeming book, and all of this is happening. All this are in the world around us. And what I actually think is that if I think people need some optimism right now. And so I think people are finding hope in this book that I was hoping they would find. I think they're finding the hope because we need it right now. And I'm glad that I've written something that I think people are finding as a way to get inspired, or to at least to keep alive and keep fighting the next day.
I think that this sense of hope and the sort of will to keep fighting the next day is so needed right now. And I liked what you said when you opened up solidarity is power, particularly in this moment when we are under attack from all sides. So appreciate that. So one of the questions I have for you is, I guess in the words of the old song, like something's happening here. Why now? In your book, you tackle the question of what's driving workers to mobilize and to organize right now. And can you share what you discovered, what you believe is going on?
Yeah, I really think we're looking at three things that coalesce together and to give us the special sauce that we're seeing right now. The first is the pandemic. The pandemic was, there's this thing in American history. Whenever there's a disaster, the people who are really rich and have power use that disaster to take advantage of everybody else. And while there were elements of that in the pandemic had a lot of exceptions to that. And one of the things that happened is because of the way we handled the pandemic in terms of the economy, unemployment, and all these other things, workers found themselves with a fair amount of power in their hands because we all were buying stuff and someone needed to make that stuff. And we were all going places and people needed to be on those airplanes and we had to send our kids to school. And those workers who we told were special, we said to these workers, you're special people. And then we didn't treat them like that. And a lot of workers took that really personally. And workers who never would have stood up and gone out on strike or raised their voice like this before did in this case because they could see the gap between what we were telling them that they're heroes and how they were
Mhm.
being treated. And I think that's the first element. The second element is the old fogey part in me, which is that younger workers are doing this, are doing solidarity, are doing worker power, are doing union with not just an enthusiasm and an energy, but with a skill and with
Mhm.
and with an imagination and with a capacity that we just haven't seen. You know, when I got involved in the labor movement in the 90s, like the cool thing to be was an anarchist, and you withdrew from the global economy and you went off and you were basically Ted Kaczynski without the bombs. You know, you went off on their own. Younger workers today are consciously choosing solidarity, and I love them for that. And I'm so deeply impressed and in awe. And it's a great feeling as someone who just turned 51 to know that there's a new generation who will take care of me when I get old. And then the third thing that happened, and I think it's partly a product of the first two things, but also partly its own, is that across the country, union after union after union, we saw storied and historic unions take a breath and change what they were doing. And the three examples I talk about in the book are the Hollywood workers, SAG-AFTRA, the Teamsters, and then most famously the United Auto Workers, who chose new leadership, chose new directions, chose to assert their power, to seek change, and who ended up with some pretty powerful victories. And so you take those three pieces together, and I don't think you can unpack them completely, but the
Mhm.
pandemic and the young workers and these new unions, all of that creates this cocktail that I think has built us to this moment, which even in this terrible past year is still a moment worth celebrating and being excited about.
I love that, and thinking about it as a cocktail of all the good things. And we're going to dig into some of those specific campaigns as we go through the night. But first, I want to talk about we are in such unusual period of history right now. And in addition to your work at EPI, you are a labor historian. And so, what period in American labor history do you think is most similar, resonates most with what we're experiencing now in our current world?
I think you can pick almost any time, but I really do think the 1920s is where you want to look. And here's why I think the 1920s
Hmm.
matter. It's a period of time in American history where you had an established labor movement that had been established for quite some time, but it was very small. Its actual numbers were quite small. It had pockets of strength and lots of kind of weak spots, but there were a lot of them. And what you had at that time in American labor is you had all these churning moments underneath the surface.
Hmm.
Workers were educating themselves and radicalizing themselves and trying out new things, and they weren't quite breaking through yet. They
Hmm.
weren't quite breaking through, but you had this sense that something was there, and it was being smothered by a hostile government. That should ring some bells for some of us. And it also was a time when there was real, I mean, the economy is always changing, but there was real change. The 1920s, especially, um, you know, we fully move away from the craft industries of the 19th century to the mass production that we all
Hmm.
know of when we think of factories. Like the 19 teens, 1920s are when that really reached its fruition. And the emergence of the mass manufacturing economy as a thing. And now we're in the midst of that, but it's the service industry. The biggest job growth in the coming years is going to be care work for older workers or for older people, for the young, for people who need childcare, for the sick.
Hmm.
And that care industry and all the things related to it is not new. We've all seen it, but it's growing. And
Hmm.
so I think that's why the 20s are such a good comparison piece.
So, one of the stories that you talk about in your book, you tell a really powerful story about the Frito-Lay campaign in great detail with like great worker quotes. And so I wondered if you could share with our audience a little bit about that campaign and why did you choose to feature that? Why does it matter so much?
Yeah. Frito-Lay, the workers in Topeka, Kansas, they were the first big strike of the pandemic era. These workers, when we all, these people, like most of the people watching this, who ended up working remotely during the pandemic, I don't know about you all, but I found my safety in Cheetos. I ate a lot of Cheetos because, the great thing about Cheetos, especially in those early days when our Zoom cameras all were terrible, like no one could see the orange dust. So you could eat all the Cheetos you wanted to. Well, people were making those Cheetos and they were making them in Topeka, Kansas. And those workers were doing uh, 80, 90, 100-hour weeks
Mm,
for months on end without a single day off, without any opportunities. And and they got tired of it. And I had the great privilege of going down to Topeka and spending a couple of days with bakery, confectionery, tobacco workers, and grain miller workers local 218 in Topeka,
mhm,
BCTGM, local 218. Amazing people, and I came away from it with a deep respect for my Cheetos. A good friend of mine worked for I'll not name the company, but a large manufacturer of canned vegetables. And that person will never eat those canned vegetables again, having worked in the plant that made them.
mm,
Having talked to
mm,
the people who make Cheetos, I want to eat more Cheetos. The care they brought to the quality of the product, the work of the people who clean in that plant, and my goodness, just the breadth and like the skill and the commitment required to make us good Cheetos was really something. And those workers standing up and going out on strike in 2022, when they'd never done it before, when half of their colleagues didn't go out with them, but when they still went out and when they actually won really significant gains, it not only was a great thing for them, but it also was a starter's gun for other workers because the John Deere strike,
mhm.
all the strikes in other kinds of food packing all across the Midwest, like they got their cue from what happened in those folks in Topeka. I was thrilled to have a chance to meet with them, just amazing people who had real pride in their work. I just love, as an organizer, I love seeing people who have pride in their work, and they had such pride, and they were so good at it. And I've eaten so many Cheetos since just to honor their work. But they no longer work those 90-hour weeks. They do have a guaranteed day off a week now. They got some raises. It's still not the best job in the world, but they've made real improvements, and I'm glad for that.
And Camper, remind me, what was the name of the shifts that they did? The suicide shifts, I think.
Suicide shifts,
Can you
yeah.
just describe a little bit? Because they're terrible shifts, and they
Yeah,
were able to end those, right?
yeah, you would be called in early and you would work your normal shift. And then at the end of your shift, you'd be told, oh, you're going to stay another 4 hours late. And they would have sometimes as few as 6 hours between the end of one shift and the start of another. And that would continue for days on end. Again, all of us have had like, oh, I worked a tough 48 hours there. But they did it for weeks and weeks and
Yeah.
weeks. There's this one, it's in the book, this one worker I talked to who had this terrible story about her child. Her child was talking to a friend, and the friend said, "Was your mother do?" And the child said, "My mother sleeps," because that's all this kid knew of their mother, because all that mother could do when they got home from those
Right.
90-hour weeks was crash on the couch and fall asleep. And so this was what their kid knew of their work, that my mom sleeps. And that's, no one should have that experience of their mother. They should have a parent, a child experience. And so it was, again, they needed it and they got it and they won.
Great. And then the other takeaway from that story, in addition to the fact that workers won and that strike sparked other labor actions at places like John Deere, is that Cheetos are superior to vegetables. Like that, I think, is the takeaway that you're offering up here. Um,
Absolutely. I also should
yeah.
mention, just as like a purely personal note, that my journey as a labor organizer began in many ways to a trip I made to Kansas in the late 90s to help out some workers. And I just noticed my old friend Mark Dilly's here in the audience, one of my very
Mhm.
first mentors in the movement. We took this trip to Kansas together. And so to go back to Topeka, Kansas and see these workers was a nice full circle moment for me in the movement.
Love that. Okay, so one of the things your book talks a lot about how labor's upped its game in this moment. But one of the things that we're not really seeing that in the numbers that we think we should be seeing it in. So um, in the 1930s, union membership basically doubled in just a few years. And so why do you think we aren't seeing the numbers rise as rapidly now?
So it's a real challenge, and I think it's not that we're here to criticize my book, which is wonderful. It makes a great gift, but I think one of the things that's true is I'm talking about an upsurge, and we're not seeing as much of a change in the numbers. It's not certainly nothing like the 1930s. And certainly the first culprit is our massively broken labor law system. Um, EPI has put out countless work on this. I know many other people who are on this have experienced
Hmm.
it firsthand. Our labor law is broken in this country. The fact that the workers I profile in the book were able to do as much as they did with a broken labor law is testament to how amazing and wonderful they are. Another thing which I think is actually a better sign is that there's lots of ways that labor is expressing itself that don't show up in union membership numbers. Again, one of the biggest organizers of that event I was at in Minneapolis, because I live in the Twin Cities, last week was a worker center called CETUL, Center for Workers United in Struggle. I won't
Hmm.
try the Spanish. Um, the people it represents don't count up in union statistics, but CETUL is a powerful force for low-wage workers across the Twin Cities. It helps all kinds of people, and these alt labor formations that are out there that I admit I used to be kind of skeptical of are stepping up in all kinds of ways. In my work at EPI, I've helped with formation of worker centers in Ohio,
Hmm.
and the things they've done to help workers there are really profound. And so there are other ways in which workers are showing up in this that don't count in union statistics. But I will tell you, it is a real challenge. And the reality is, however much we in the labor movement want to make it happen, as a great labor theorist named Rich Jesselson wrote, the workers will decide when they want this, and our job as a labor movement is to be ready when they are and to step up and to help them out. And I think we're seeing that in all kinds of places with the labor education that we're seeing with all kinds of other work. But yeah, I mean, I really wish we were seeing more numbers, and I kind of wonder if the 2024 election had gone another way, if maybe we would be seeing those numbers by now. It's going to be a heavy lift still, but I would rather have gone into 2025 with today's labor movement than any one of my lifetime.
Um, One of the things that you just mentioned is some of the work that you had done. This is not part of your book, but some of the work that you did in your role at EPI with the EARN team, our Economic Analysis and Research Network, and Policy Matters Ohio to build the Worker Center. And I know you're really proud of that. And so I just wanted to call that out a little bit. So, Kamper, one of the things that when you were talking about the broken labor laws, one of the things that reminded me of is the piece in your book about Leonard Scott. And can you share that story just because it's so outrageous?
Yes, and I will do a screen share in a moment. So there's a
Yeah,
guy named Leonard Scott who was a lawyer for management in the 60s, 70s, and early 80s. He worked for employers to try to stop union drives, and he donated all his papers to Cornell University,
right.
which has fantastic digital archives. You can pull up the papers of a very effective union buster, from this time, and I'm going to pull up a document that's in these Cornell archives. You can find this yourself. There's a link to it in my book. Is it showing now?
It is, you'll need to scroll down to show the,
Yeah.
yeah.
I'm saving it for a reveal.
Okay. It's your big
Yeah,
reveal. Got it.
yeah. So these are handwritten notes that this lawyer named Leonard Scott wrote for a company called Warren Ogden, this is 1978, as you can see on the top. They were trying to, they were facing a union organizing drive, and these are handwritten notes. He wrote them. And if you look down what he wrote a timeline of how a union drive goes. And right here, violate the law here. Violate the law here. So understand what happened here. How powerful the union busting industry in this country is that he felt safe to write on a
Hmm.
piece of paper, violate the law. And if you're a fan of The Wire like me, you know you don't take notes on a criminal conspiracy. He wrote it on a piece of paper and then felt free to donate that piece of paper to archives where anybody like me can pull it up and watch it. Um, that's the challenge we face from
Hmm.
hostile employers is they care so little for the law that they don't even pretend that they're not violating it. They just go ahead and break that law. It's truly one of the most enraging but also fascinating things I've ever come across in my time. And the thing is, you don't have to look that hard to find examples of it. I just is
Hmm.
a particularly egregious one from where I sit.
Yeah, that one is such a great example about what workers are up against. One of the campaigns that you talk about in your book, and then I know a lot of the folks on this webinar are familiar with, um, is the United Auto Workers contract campaign in 2023 that I think gave all of us a shot in the arm at a time when we needed it. And so, can you talk a little bit about what made that campaign so unusual?
Yeah, I mean, if you had, if you could go back in time to about 2021 or so, and you were going to say, look, which unions are going to spark change in the next few years, like with all respect to the wonderful people in it, you would not have named the United Auto Workers. The United Auto Workers had been embroiled in some internal scandals. Some of their old leadership had committed some crimes and gone to jail over it. And the union was struggling against powerful employers and against non-union competitors. And I think a lot of people counted the United Auto Workers out. And what happened in 2023 is in the space of 5 months, a whole new leadership was elected. Sean Fain being the name that we all know, but a whole new leadership team was elected to the United
Mhm.
Auto Workers. And they immediately rolled that into a massive contract campaign against the big three automakers, Ford,
Mhm.
GM, and Stellantis. I still call it Chrysler, but Stellantis is what they are now. And for the first time ever in the history of that union, they struck all three automakers at once. Now, I grew up in Chicagoland, and whenever I would go up north, we would take I-90, Interstate 90, and just short of Rockford, you'd pass the Chrysler Belvidere plant, Belvidere, Illinois. And it was a big auto plant. And you'd drive by and you'd see hundreds of cars coming off the assembly line. That plant had closed a few years before. And when those big three, when the UAW called a strike of the big three automakers, I went to a picket line here in town and met some of the people who'd come from that plant. They were now living up here because they had a right to keep a job, but they had to move. So they were living at like extended stay Americas and working at this plant. And now they were on strike for the first time in their lives. They won in that strike. They won that plant being reopened. That doesn't happen in America. It doesn't happen anywhere that you win a strike to reopen a massive plant like that. Now the company's tried to back away, and there's been some fight on it, but they've done really well. And they launched an incredibly innovative strike. They didn't just walk off the job with everybody. They did this stand-up strike where they picked a plant here and a plant there and a plant here, and they called them out. And I talk about this in the book that I had this long ago and far away. I had this colleagues now, we had this idea of a Pied Piper strike where you would just get up without any warning and walk down, say, okay, everyone, we're walking out. Come on now. We're on strike right now. And everyone would just follow you. And the spontaneity of it would just rattle the employers and you'd win. Of course, that was always just a pipe dream because there's no way you could do that. Well, in the middle of
Right.
this United Auto Workers strike, the
Right.
company and the union sit down to talk to each other. And and the company comes back with no movement at all. And Sean Fain and his team stand up and say, you've just lost the Kentucky truck plant. And 10 minutes later, the workers at the Kentucky truck plant are streaming off the job. And I think about the message that sent the employer. The workers were ready at a heartbeat to walk off the job. The union
Mhm.
could call them and they would come. And that was just the start of what the union could do to them. It's one of the most magnificent strikes I've ever seen in my life. It's the kind of strike that labor nerds like me used to sit around, I'd still do it. If I was running the union, here's how I'd do it. And we again we never actually thought we'd see something like it happen, but it was a labor nerd's dream and it was incredibly impressive. And I think while there have been so many amazing moments in recent years, I think that
Mhm.
strike is one for the books.
Me too. So some other uh, campaigns that have gotten a lot of attention in the media within the labor movement, you feature in your book, Amazon, Starbucks workers, SAG-AFTRA. Do you want to pick maybe one or two of those to talk about and then give us an update on some of those stories since the book came out?
Yeah, I think I'll pick Starbucks as a really classic example because again,
Hmm.
one of the many ways I've been wrong, and many other people like me, is no one would have, if you had told someone in 2018, 2019, that we're going to organize Starbucks store by store, people would have said, you can't do that. That's not, organizing doesn't work that way. You'll never be able to get the workers to stick together that long. You can't build solidarity across lines like that. You can't have that kind of, connection across all workers who don't even know each other organizing together. And
Hmm.
and when it started, it's just a couple of stores in Buffalo. And then all of a sudden, it was a couple more and a couple more. And it was in red states and it was in blue states and it was on one coast, and it was another. And hundreds of stores organized and thousands of workers organized. Their win rate in these elections was ridiculously high, and the numbers were just staggering. And they
Hmm.
kept that solidarity for years until in late 2023, the employer finally, Starbucks finally agreed to come to the table and negotiate with them. Now, because of the way the election went in 2024, Starbucks has kind of backed off of some of that. And the workers in Starbucks right now are on extended unfair labor practice strikes across the country. And I urge you to honor their picket lines and not go to Starbucks and go to other coffee places, and support the workers on the picket line. Show
Hmm.
up and walk
Yeah.
with them and put duct tape on the handles of your picket signs, whatever else you do. But but the fact that they've stuck together this long at all defies all the laws of physics of unions. Like, this is not supposed to be how it works. Workers are not supposed to stick together and stay engaged for this long a period of time without a contract, without substantial changes in the workplace. And it's a truly marvelous thing that, again, is a testament to the way workers were treated in the pandemic, the power of young workers, and the willingness of workers united to embrace this campaign and support it all the way through. When, again, conventional union wisdom would have told them, don't bother with that at all. It's really, again, it's just staggering to my mind to see this happening, and um, amazing. And those Starbucks workers are now everywhere. You go to, again, when I was in Minneapolis on Friday with 50,000 people, like, a lot of Starbucks workers were there with their
Hmm.
families, with their kids, with their grandparents. They're populating over. It's like blowing on a dandelion. Those workers are scattering all over, and what they'll do in the years to come just fills me with excitement.
I just because you mentioned seeing the Starbucks workers at the protest in Minneapolis, I actually want to pivot quickly to a question about Minneapolis. I know one of the things that while unions have been a pathway to the middle class for Black and Brown workers, the history of the labor movement is decidedly mixed on the issue of racial justice, is how I will say it. But I know you've talked a little bit about what you've seen in Minneapolis, and I want to see if you could just share it out, what you're seeing from unions in terms of support for racial justice, immigrant workers, that sort of thing.
Yeah, the trivia question I mentioned in the book is that what's the first piece of legislation that the labor movement got passed in this country? It was the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, because the labor movement in the 19th century was a white workers' labor movement, and they wanted to keep the foreigners out, they wanted to keep Black people out, and they wanted to keep women out. And they
Mhm.
were remarkably successful in keeping them
Yeah.
from unionized professions. And it didn't end in the 19th century. The labor movement is like the rest of the country. It has struggled with its demons. And the biggest demons for the labor movement have been racism, sexism, and xenophobia. And that is still like, this is not a solved problem. It is not a solved problem by any stretch of the imagination.
Mhm.
But what you saw um, in Minneapolis on Friday was workers of from every kind of union. I mean, I saw every union sign, every union in the Twin Cities had a sign there, at least one. Everyone I could think of, and I know most of them. From the building trades, to the teachers, to the airport workers, to the bus
Mhm.
drivers, to brewery workers and hotel workers, they all were there. And what it speaks to is is the power of the union to be a tool to educate and move people. Unions don't always do this, and unions can do better jobs of it. But unions, when they choose to be sites for workers to connect with each other and share their stories and discover their harmony, um, it can be amazing. And at Topeka, which I talked about in the book, there was a real split in that plant between the white workers and the Hispanic workers, and they
Mhm.
found solidarity on the picket line. Like, they got the picket line. They and it's not, again, it's not that it's all of a sudden sunshine and roses, but the experience of solidarity, the experience of working together, of seeing, hey, this person, I have more in common with this person than I do, because our work is the same, our bosses are the same, our challenges are the same. And in Minneapolis, it's our neighbors are the same, and the people who are being terrorized are people we all care about. And so we're all going to stand up for them. It is still going to be a struggle, but to see, one of the small elements here in Minnesota that doesn't get a lot of attention is that the labor councils in what we call Greater Minnesota, by which we mean rural Minnesota, all came out and
Mhm.
supported the January 23rd strike.
Hmm.
All of them did. And those are like the membership of those labor councils is white workers in rural Minnesota. They all stood up for it because they could see it with their eyes. And what we've got to be doing as a labor movement is constantly educating our members, constantly pushing our members to think more, and challenging our members to be their best selves.
Thanks for that, Camper. We're gonna do 3 minutes more of questions with just us, and then we're gonna move into some of the audience questions that we've gotten. Um, I am gonna, let's see, in my 3 minutes, what can I do here? Okay. So one of the questions I have for you, and you talked a little bit about hope um, in the beginning. But given the bleak and completely enraging times that we're living in now, I don't think we can talk about it enough. So my penultimate question to you is, what is bringing you hope these days?
What's bringing me hope is, I mean, there's so many pieces, because I try to find hope now, and I think you have to. But what's bringing me hope is that everywhere I go, I see faces I've never seen before.
Mhm.
Um, there were times in the labor movement or I'd go to a conference, I'd go to a picket line, I'd go to a march, and it was good people and it was wonderful people, but it was the same people. And it was the folks, and we all kind of knew each other and we were a bit of a club in some ways, right? Now everywhere I go, not just to the big marches, but to small worker demonstrations, to meetings of the Emergency Workplace Organizing Committee that I'm a part of, to fundraisers at the Worker Center. I see all kinds of people who are new to it. Um, it gives me such great hope to see these new voices, and the challenge for those of us who've been around for a while
Mhm.
is we've got to let these folks build the movement. We can't tell them you have to join the movement on our terms. You have to be that's not how this is going to work. We're going to let the next generation step up and run it. And that's not necessarily a generation in terms of their age, but just their time in the movement because there are new people who are in their 70s who are coming out to this. We
Mhm.
need to let them and it's I feel like there's an openness to that more so than I've seen in the rest of my time in the movement. And I love that for us. I love that we're trying to reinvent our movement and we know it's important. And I'm thrilled about that. I think that's giving me so much hope.
Thank you for that. My last question, just because it's one of my favorite parts of the book, to close us out before we move into audience questions, could you share the last couple of paragraphs of your epilogue?
Certainly. Solidarity can change the world. It has before and it will again. That's why, despite all the horrible things happening right now, I remain optimistic. The American labor movement was supposed to be dead in the ground by now. If the trends of the first 2 decades of this century had continued, we would be. Instead, we're fighting, we're growing, and we're organizing. The heroes in this book are the reason why. Celebrating them is more important than ever. Yes, it's going to be rough, but don't ever count the working class out. We've got the power.
Love that. Um, all right, we have got several additional questions in the chat. And Camper, and sorry, I'm just flagging I'm not sure if my internet is going to hold. So I am going to, if mine goes out, Camper, I'm just going to ask you to tackle the questions that are coming in through the chat.
Outstanding.
Okay, but hopefully it will hold. All right. So let us dig in. And Camper, can you see the questions too? I'm going to
I
feed them
can.
to you, but I want to make sure you can see them. Okay, great. Um, so one of the questions, which I think is interesting, and I actually don't know if you have an answer to this question from a new, um, is there are growing conversations for a national sustained strike to push back against the current administration's atrocities. What are lessons we've seen from different union campaigns to help us prepare for this? And then I think the key question is, can we do it?
So it's a good question. I I love the enthusiasm and the kind of, it's a terrible word, moxie of like, let's go on a general strike. What I would say is that a strike is just one tool in our toolbox. And I think there's a risk of becoming too focused just on a strike, just on a big strike, and thinking that that's necessarily the solution. I think you've got to, like, workers should be figuring out what's going to work best in their own space, what's going to be effective for what they do, and it's got to be rooted in a real, I mean, it's kind of a cliche term, but a power analysis, which is like, how are we going to move the ball where we need it to go? How are we going to get workers? How are we going to get working families, working people, to get into the driver's seat in this country? And maybe the path that way is for everyone walking off the job all at once. I don't know that that's the only way. And I will say, if we're going to get there, we're not going to do it in one leap. You don't just go from zero to a general strike. And this is one of the dangers of a study of history, is that I think the past often looks like that to us because we weren't on the ground for all the nitty gritty. I just finished rereading Sidney Fine's book on the Flint sit down strike, the kind of
Mm.
the prototypical American strike, and we think of it now as this great upsurge of, man, they were fighting with each other all the time. They were all scared. They didn't know if the police were going to come beat them up or shoot them. The late leadership within the union was fighting with each other all the time. They kept sending this one guy out of town so he wouldn't screw up the negotiations. And the workers were running out of food, and they all kind of stank because they couldn't get showers. And what were they doing? And like, it didn't feel to them like this amazing moment of, like, they were just
Mhm.
doing a thing. And then it turned out to be this amazing moment in history. And so I think instead of trying to make the amazing moments for us, let's embrace solidarity. Let's seek ways to build our power. And I think what'll happen is we'll look back and we'll say, ah, those were the moments that won it for us. I don't think we'll know what they are in the time. And instead of trying to guess what it's going to be, let's just build power wherever we can and make it happen. I think that's my view.
Thanks, Camper. A question from Versa Clark. Do right to work states still hamper union organizing?
Well, yes. I mean, and so just quick jargon for everyone here. Right to work states are
Mhm.
states where state law prohibits what's called a union shop. A union shop is where, if the union represents the place, everyone's contributing to its functioning through union dues. And when you have an open shop in a right to work state, that means people can get the benefits of the union without having to contribute to the union through union dues. Now, a lot of people in the movement call those folks freeloaders, and I understand that sentiment, but the real problem is the boss, not your fellow coworkers. Our goal is to get those people on board. But nonetheless, the reality is, right to work states mean that unions have fewer resources available to them to fight. It also, a right to work state isn't just about the law, but it's about a state that's hostile to unions. I think of the terrible, I mean, brave but unfortunate outcome at the Warrior Met strike in Alabama, which were mine workers at the Warrior Met Company who were out for a very long time. And the state and the county used every tool in their book, injunctions and restrictions on the picket lines, and accidentally hitting picketers with police cars as a way to dissuade those workers from striking and staying in the strike. And as Mark notes in the chat, like, right to work is, it's hard a racist measure. I talk about it in the book. Like, it's about keeping black people down. Like, that's what it is. Um, and
Mhm.
and this is still a challenge. It's not an insurmountable one. It never has been an insurmountable one. But yeah, it's real. It's there, and we've got to be fighting it. One of the best pieces of news in recent years is Michigan repealing right to work.
Mhm.
I certainly hope we're going to see that in some other states too. Hopefully Virginia soon, or Wisconsin if after the next election.
Yeah.
It does matter. So yeah, it's still real. It's still a challenge. And those of you who are nerds in the movement like me, let's make sure we work on talking to people about what this means in a language that everyone will understand. We're too easy to talk about this in internal jargon. Like, it's about laws and practices designed to weaken unions. That's what it is. And it's not just the right to work law, but it's the whole
Mhm.
ethos of a state, which is that we hate our workers and we're going to try and screw them over. My colleague Chandra Childers has produced, along with many comrades, has produced
Mhm.
this fantastic series called "Rooted in Racism and Exploitation," which is a whole assessment of the Southern economic model and how it's terrible for workers. And right to work status is just a part of that. And they're all connected to each other. And I hope people take some time, if you haven't, to look at that series. It's got amazing stuff in it. I mean, enraging stuff, angrifying stuff, but amazing.
Thank you. And I am just going through the questions because there are so many good ones and they're giving me ideas for like reports and work we should do. But um, I uh, let me go to Larry Michelle's question. There's much to be inspired about with workers seeking unions and the public being supportive. My concern is that major efforts, such as Starbucks and Amazon, are not obtaining contracts. If this continues, it will dampen the surge. Seems that the entire labor movement's vulnerable if they don't mobilize to obtain contracts. What's to be done?
Yeah, I mean, if I knew that, I could be running the American labor movement. But it is a good question, Larry, and it's a legit problem, right? That workers, like again, Starbucks and Amazon are really the two big examples right now. Where we've seen workers organize successfully. What they don't yet have is a contract. Um, I'll make a slightly defensive answer, which is that I think it's easy to overemphasize the importance of a contract when the goal is workers organizing and building power. We live in a country that labor law is built around the contract, and I'm glad we do. But there have long been labor regimes in the country and in the world that were not built around signing agreements. Indeed, back in the day, the industrial workers of the world, the Wobblies, they hated contracts because it means you're making a deal with the devil, and they don't believe that. Now, look, we can't do that everywhere. But I would encourage folks to think about like the contract isn't the only step you can take. Um, more pragmatically for today. Um, what I think we're seeing going really well at Starbucks, I know less about the Amazon context, I admit, because I think a lot of that's
Mhm.
happening more under wraps, is that the workers are building a union even if they don't have a contract. They've built a community. They are educating each other. They have mutual aid set up for each
Mhm.
other. They have social and cultural pieces that connect them. They've built a union without a contract. Now it's going to be easier if they get a contract, but they have built a union, and that union is a
Mhm.
very real thing. And so I would hope that, again, I want them to get a contract too. I think he's right that the longer you go without a contract, the harder it is. But it's not the only thing. It's not the only thing. If the union is honest about it, if the union's open with its members, and I think this again, another thing the Starbucks campaign has done very well, they've been very clear with each other about this is a really long fight. We might at the end of the day not get a contract, but we're going to keep fighting, and this is why. And they've owned it. It's when unions kind of shine on workers. Oh, we'll get you a contract, no problem. That's the problem area. That's terrible stuff. You should never do that, but too many unions do, and it's challenging.
Okay, I'll just reminder if you have any questions, instead of putting them in the chat, if you can drop them into the Q&A, it's easier for us to take a look at them all together. I'm going to go up to a question from Michael Rothman. Camper, I don't know if you're going to have an answer on this, but it's a good conversation. How can we combat Trump's war on federal workers?
Yeah, I, I did an absolutely great job writing this book and barely at all mentioning federal workers. And then like the day I turn in the manuscript, Trump launches his war on federal workers. It was brilliant, brilliant timing on my part, I assure you. So let's first of all note that the war on federal workers is in many ways a piece of unfinished business from decades of theoretically pro-labor policymakers who never quite fully went all the way to give federal workers their union rights. It's always
Mhm.
been federal workers have always had this very contingent status that was always vulnerable to an executive who didn't want to do anything, going all the way back, of course, to the famous firing of the air traffic controllers by Ronald Reagan. But federal workers have always had this precarious situation. So I think the first thing all of us have to do in the movement is say, look, the next time we have a chance, we've got to enshrine the rights of federal workers more firmly and solidly into law and protect them more seriously than we do now because we've left them adrift. But the other thing I would say is I look at groups like the Federal Unionist Network Fund. Um, one of the odd things that's happening is federal union membership is going up because workers are coming in droves to their union. And because the weakness of federal labor law has been so transparent and glaring for so long, while the war on the workers is serious and workers are losing their jobs, the actual power those workers have hasn't gone down as much as it could because they never had a lot of structural power to begin with. So maybe now there's a chance for federal workers. And I'm being a little bit Pollyannish here. I admit it. I wrote an optimistic book. I'm being an optimist. But I think this is a chance for federal workers themselves to say, okay, we need to figure out what kind of movement we want to build for ourselves. And what thankfully I think is like the best piece of this is I think the rest of the movement's paying attention right now. I freely admit I spent 25 years in the labor movement. I've barely thought about federal workers unions until recently, and at most I've thought about postal workers, and that's on me and on lots of other people like me. We all got to pay more attention to it and give them the support they need. And I think we can, but yeah, it's rough. And I'm very sorry that so many of us, frankly, didn't give you all enough attention in the years in prior years. We didn't prioritize your rights. We didn't prioritize your situation. We need to do that.
Okay, I am going to go to a question from Rachel Egan. Rachel, I hope I pronounced your last name correctly. Rachel says, I remember hearing a journalist covering the Warrior Met coal miner strike, remarking that the strikers were generally politically right-leaning, while the people who came out to support the picket line were often Bernie bros, producing some pretty, sorry, I just lost the question, producing some pretty interesting relationships. Sorry, I think the end of that question is if somebody could drop it back in. I think the end of the question is about are there any lessons to learn from other strikes in terms of this crossover between right-leaning and left-leaning folks on the picket line?
Yeah, and let me first give a shout out to the journalist you almost certainly read, the great Kim Kelly, who is largely freelanced her way through labor journalism these years, but has been on the ground in all sorts of places. And she basically camped out at Warrior Met for many months, reporting on that strike. And um, this is this is what happens when things. This is going to sound weird. This is what happens when things happen. The British Prime Minister Harold Macmillan, no one should be expected to remember his name, but he was a great politician long ago, back in the day. And he was asked once by a school child, "What do politicians fear the most?" And he said, "Events, dear boy, events. When you have events, when you have facts on the ground, opportunities arise for change." And so when you have workers who by the way they were brought up, by the fact that they're white, by the culture they live in the South, are naturally conservative. When they go on strike and they find themselves being supported by a Bernie bro, you have these moments of connection. And those are moments of possibility. They don't always work out. But Warrior Met's a really good example for a lot of the people who were involved in that strike have become politically active in Alabama and have stepped up to the plate in all kinds of different places. I can't remember any of the names right now, of course, because I don't have them in front of me, but you should read Kim's work on this because, again, whenever you have this moment of possibility, people come together in circumstances they don't normally come together and they talk to each other and they share with each other. They grow. This is why I know we will win, is because when you give workers a chance, like the space to talk to people who are different than them, to grow and connect with people who are different than them, they come away embracing solidarity. There's this great research done by Jake Grumbach and Paul Freimer
Mm.
that says that just being in a union reduces racial resentment. It reduces racism because just the presence of other people in this space does that. The Warrior Met strike didn't have a good outcome on the picket line. It's too bad. But there were some real moments built there where workers who were exposed to things that they'd never been exposed to before, who were brave in ways that they'd never been brave before, who met people they'd never met before, had these moments, these events where they connected with each other. It's really inspiring stuff. And we see this all over. Again, I think of those Stellantis workers who I met on the picket line here in the Twin Cities during the UAW strike. These guys were in their 50s. They'd never been out on strike before. And all these young Starbucks workers and others are coming up and showing their support for them. And everybody was learning from everybody. It was amazing stuff.
Okay, I think we've got time for one or two more questions. One of the questions that I want to pose to you, give me one second. Um, Sorry, folks. I'm going to go to the other one while I look for this other one that I can't find. Okay. Douglas Swanson says, great book, Dave, thinking about how best to use it to educate the future workers of the world. What class would you use it as a textbook for?
Thanks for the question, Doug. I'll send you your $20 later. Doug's an old friend of mine and a labor educator in Missouri and a fantastic organizer in his own right. Um, I would what I tried to do with this book. This is like a plug for the book. I'm sorry, it's me very selfish from it. I tried to write the chapters so that they could be so they could be standalone pieces, so you could have it in a book club, or you could give one chapter of it even to a class of high school students or someone who aren't going to read a whole book like this, but maybe wanted to read something. Um, my hope is that people all over, I've got some history in here, I've got some economics in here, I've got some sociology in here. My hope is that folks can find use for it all over the place. I had the great honor. This is so much bragging right now. I had the great honor earlier this week to speak to students at Yale Law School about this book, and they found a lot in it that was helpful, and I'm thrilled at that. And so. Um, what I will ask is if you do find it being used in an interesting circumstance, I'd love to know about it, just so I can get a sense of how it's being used. I'd appreciate that.
Great. Um, I want to go back and Camper again. I'm not sure you're gonna have the international picture of labor relations, so you can tell me to move on to another question. But um, a question from Karen Lamantia. Do you see viable work and solidarity between U.S. unions and those in the Americas, Canada, Cuba? Where are their connections growing?
Yeah, this is a perennial challenge for labor, and it's a really obvious challenge is obvious for a pretty critical reason. Everyone says international solidarity is a good idea. It's at the very bottom of everyone's to-do list, um, because of all the things. And I think one of the ways that today, the recent moment that we're in right now, is potentially helpful for this, is that too often American labor, but also not just American, other countries too, labor unions have been a little protective of their turf in a way that's like workers in other countries are my rivals rather than my solidarity colleagues. And there's still some of that out there now. Workers who I think who think, well, boy, if someone else in another country has a good job, that's one less good job here. The more we can challenge each other to say like improving working conditions for workers in that other country is going to improve our working conditions too. Um, Raising their pay is going to raise our pay. Making their workplaces safer is going to make our workplaces safer. It is a heavy lift. It is another one of these places where I'm excited by younger workers who don't have as many of the prejudices of the past, who don't have as much of the baggage that we're bringing into it, and their ability to reach out to other folks. And again, you look at people like Starbucks and Amazon workers who are really starting to connect across the globe. The rest of us in labor need to lean into that. It is absolutely understandable and of course essential for unions in America to protect to fight for the best deal for American workers they can. Of course, you should do that. But we all need to understand that the best way to get a good deal for American workers is to raise everyone across the world. And we're not an island of privilege. We never have been, but we need to move off of that and embrace that. And we're seeing it at Amazon, we're seeing it at Starbucks, we're seeing it in higher education across the line. I hope that we'll see more of it.
Thank you, Camper. And unfortunately, I think that has to be our last word. There were so many great questions that we did not get to. We should have added more time to this. But Camper, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts to all of our audience. Thank you so much for your smart questions and comments in the chat. And I will turn it over to Jen to close us out.
Just one last thank you to everybody for joining us. I hope that you found great insight and a warm time hanging out with Dave and Naomi this evening. I dropped the link in the chat to where we will be posting the recording. Fear not, you do not need to copy it and take it with you if you didn't already click it. We will be sending out an email early next week that'll have the link to that page as well as a survey because we would love to hear from you and hear your thoughts and ideas. And maybe we'll get together with Dave again to finish answering all your questions. Have a great night and stay strong, everyone.
Solidarity.